Right, let's talk about studio barbells. I know they can feel a bit overwhelming when you first get started because obviously you've got to work out the logistics of the class, and if you're a community instructor, maybe like, oh, where am I going to store them? But I've had these for a lot of years, I'm going to say a decade, and I still have the first set that I ever started with. So lucky enough that my school let me keep the rack in their shed. I've got a special shed that they let me have. I store my equipment in there, so I've got 24 sets in there. I didn't have 24 to start with, I bought 20, and then I added in a few more and some slightly heavier weights as I went. You don't have to go wild to begin with. If you're going to have a smaller group, you can buy them in smaller numbers. Maybe you don't even need a rack. They start from around, depending on the brand, and obviously the features and the specifications differ very slightly from barbell set to barbell set, which we'll talk about in a minute. But they start from around 70 to 80 quid for a set, a 20 kilo set. Obviously, some are more expensive than others. So I'm just going to walk you through this to begin with. So this is the basic set. As you can see, I've got 3 plates on the end and what's called a collar. So this part in the middle, this is my studio bar. On the end, I've got spring collars. So you squeeze them to release them from the bar. When you first get them, they can be quite stiff and people aren't always sure how to do them. But you'll see here, one side is flatter than the other. They're the sides that go in onto the bar to keep everything secure. There are other options with collars depending on the set that you buy. These are for an Olympic bar, so these aren't the right size, but you can also get clip collars like this, which you just clip. So some studio barbell sets are made off the back of this type of mechanism, so it just depends what comes with your set or what your gym have purchased. On the bar, there's 3 plates on each side, which are all removable. These are the smallest weights, which are 1.25 kilos. These are 2.5 kilos, and these ones are 5 kilos. Now, adding those together, both ends, comes to 17.5 kilos. This is a 20 kilogram set, so we would estimate that the bar weighs approximately 2.5 kilos on its own. So that's how you get to your 20 kilos. So when you're trying to work out how much weight you've lifted, but you're not using the whole set, for example, you've got the 2.5s on each side, that will be 5 kilos plus the weight of the bar. So approximately 7.5 kilos altogether. So that's what would come with your original set. You've got your spring-loaded collars, which tend to be standard. Some places have a clip collar, and you can also get screw-on collars depending on which ones that you buy. So that's the bar, the weight plates, and the clips or the collars. Other options that you can have to add in, depending on the maximum load of your bar, which depends on the brand that you buy. Mine is 60 kilos. Many of them are only 40. You can also buy 10 kilo weight plates. So these obviously don't have tons of use, like just as the plate. You can obviously squat with them. You might be able to do things like tricep extensions when your clients have added on more load, or things like farmer's carries, for example. But when you're placing them on the bar, obviously you always go heavier plate first. So you would put your 10 kilo on before you then loaded on any additional weight to keep most of the weight in more so it doesn't push on the collar. So we keep everything going the heaviest weight outwards. It's also much more aesthetically pleasing, let's be completely honest. But for example, if your clients are getting stronger and they're stronger in things like a glute bridge or a hip thrust, they may need additional weight. Obviously, for the most part, we tend to work on, for lower body especially, we work on reps or the time that we're taking, like slower movements or paused reps, perhaps, because we don't necessarily have heavy enough for someone to progress with the weight entirely as an entity on its own. So if that to you sounds a bit vague, I'm just going to give you an example. The first time I ever did a hip thrust, I did it with a 20 kilogram Olympic bar with no plates on the end, so with wooden training plates. So just the bar on its own weighs 20 kilos, which is the same weight as the basic studio barbell set. Now I thrust around 200 kilos roughly as my maximum. There's no way I could do that with this, right? So therefore, it doesn't mean that I can't train with this, but it does mean that I would have to make certain adaptations in order to be able to make that happen. So if my maximum load on here was 60 kilos, which is what, about a third of the weight that I can thrust for 6 reps as a PB, we would obviously not be working at 6 reps. We would need to work at higher reps in order to get the degree of workout that we need. Other options that you can think about after you've been training with clients for a while is the option of using the dumbbell bars. Obviously, it makes it a little bit more versatile to do single arm work, that kind of thing. But just as a logistical point, obviously I'm using the same equipment, but now I need double, right? Because I've got my 2.5s on here, and I need another 2.5 twice on here in order to be able to do the same exercise. So that's just something to think about in terms of logistics. That's not to say that they're not useful, they very much are. But it might work better if you're doing something like a circuit, or if people are working in partners, so they're supersetting an exercise with the bar, superset with exercise with the plates. But again, you'll be using quite a lot of the plates up on the dumbbells, so we just need to be able to work that out. But in terms of home training, so for example, if you're going to do this at home and you don't mind buying a few extra plates, that's great for you, right? But in terms of money, if we're working the class capacity, say you've got 20 sets and you've got 20 people, they're not going to be able to use their dumbbells if they only have one set of weight plates. The Studio Barbell set is really versatile and it's really helpful, and it's actually very easy to store. So generally it's stored on an almost upright frame. So like for example here, I could probably fit the whole frame in here against the wall and it would stick out about 1.5 feet. So it's actually quite easy to store if someone will give you a small amount of space. Obviously if you're stacking it all, it takes up more floor space. They might have shelves or whatever in a storage cupboard you might be able to use, obviously very good shelves, not bookshelves. But there are different ways to store them that you can actually find that don't take up too much space. If you're a community fitness instructor, I do understand this is a huge investment. So I think my first set cost me 2.5 grand or something. So it is an investment. So I understand that that's something to think about. Only you know if it's worth it for you. It definitely has been for me. We use them twice a week, every week, and I only teach 2 nights a week. So we use them a lot. They were really handy over lockdown. People took them home on their away from class so that all my members could still train with me while I was online. We use just the plates on their own in classes where we're not using the barbell. So for example, in like booty blast style classes or core style classes, we might just bring out some weight plates. So you can use them in many different forms as well. So when you're using these plates, let's say you don't have the dumbbells, but you want to do bicep curls, it is possible to do it. So you simply put your thumb through and then you clasp around the inside groove of the plate. So you can still do things. You can still do things like shoulder presses with just the plates. You can also hold them like this, like a kettlebell, to do things like overhead presses. We can also do things like a lateral raise when you're coming out to the side. It is more difficult the heavier you get, obviously. So if I was using normal dumbbells, I would do my lateral raise with 5 to 6 kilos. However, if I was going to try and hold this, I mean, I can do it, but I have got quite big hands for a girl. So for me, I can grip it. For a lot of my clients, they might find that a little bit more difficult, a little bit trickier to grip onto. So we just need to think about the logistics of how we phase a class. Also, obviously, if you have all of your plates on your barbell, you can't then superset, let's say a bent over row, where you might have 20 kilos on the bar, and then you can't then superset that with lateral raises. Because all your weights are on the bar, you're going to have to strip the bar and go in, and by that point, it's not really a superset, is it? Let's be honest. So we need to think about that in terms of our class planning. So one way that I do this is I have other weights as well. So I have things like kettlebells or bands or whatever. So it might be that I superset something that's heavy with something that doesn't need weights or can be done with a kettlebell. So that kind of gets around that, or like a band or something. Otherwise, you could do things like do all of your heavier lifts in one pocket. So things like your compound movements where you might need the full bar, things like glute bridges or squat variations or rows or a floor press, where you're using most of your plates for that. You might be able to do them kind of close to each other, so that therefore you're not having to constantly change the plates on the bar. Body pump do this very well in that they choreograph the tracks with little breaks and so on, so that you're able to change the bar, change the plates. For people who are brand new, that can logistically still feel like a bit of a challenge because they don't know how much they're supposed to be going up with. They don't know how to change the plates. So I would say if you are introducing something to your clients, to try to do it so that exercises that have the same weight requirements don't involve people then changing them. So you might do your bent over row and then do a core exercise that doesn't need the weights. Makes it a little bit easier for you and a little bit easier for your clients. They're not constantly having to change the bar. Obviously, if you have all of the monetary resources possible and you want to mix your own music and so on and make all those breaks long enough for you to swap the bars over and the plates over, that's lovely. Like obviously that is an option and there are ways around that when you're doing a freestyle class as well. But when you're first starting out, I would say I'd probably not go overly choreographed ETM stuff that involves changing the plates until you've kind of introduced people. So now if I went to a pump style class and I was changing the weights, I know what I'm lifting. I've been lifting for 15 years. So I know what I'm going to need to do or how I'm going to change things. But if someone's brand new and they look at this and it looks like a spaceship to them, swapping the plates over might be a bit tricky, which is why many pump style classes have an introductory class to take people around the weight plates and so on. Honestly, get in the gym. If you have never lifted weights before, get in the gym and start playing with even the Olympic style bars and things that you have to change the weights of so you get really confident with them. The collars people often find tricky, but these days I don't even think about it. Whereas before I would have been all fumbly, caught my finger, wouldn't really have known how I was doing it, put it on back to front, all that kind of thing. And now these just feel like part of my life. They're just there, they're just hanging around doing their thing. So have no fear, you're going to get accustomed to all of this, but I would go see if you're at a gym, go and have a play in the studio when there's no classes and the studio's dead time. Have a play with the equipment, do your own workout with it, work out the logistics and what annoyed you about having to change weights and so on, stuff like that. And then the other option is if you're training you're going to be a community instructor, you don't have access to go and use someone else's. Maybe you buy yourself one to start training with at home and then you get in the zone with it a little bit and get accustomed to it. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking, but I hope this has helped and I really hope you start to think about whether or not you might want to deliver some resistance classes.